And welcome into another episode of Transversal, the fantasy football podcast. Brett Malamud here with Zach Malamud. Zach, how you doing?
I'm doing great. We got a really good episode today. A lot of great talk that we're going to get into, and let's do it, Brett.
Yeah, so excited. Last week we did some Dynasty buy lows, and this week we're going to be doing some sell highs. Some of those guys that are on your roster that you probably can get rid of some stock if you have them in multiple leagues, and just kind of the cliff might be coming for some of these guys, whether it's their age, their ability, their contract. So we'll go position by position. Let's get into it. We start with the quarterbacks, and we're going to start with Brock Purdy, who's in a little bit of a situation right now. We're not really sure who the starter is going to be out there with Trey Lance. So Zach, let's talk a little bit about Brock Purdy.
Yeah, and Brock Purdy, obviously Mr. Irrelevant, was drafted so late, really surprised people coming in and did a great job last year stepping in as the starting quarterback with both Trey Lance and Jimmy Garoppolo both getting injured. But there's still a ton of question marks about Brock Purdy. Yes, he played very well, but we don't know if he's going to be the starter. We don't know if they have plans for Brock Purdy to end up being the starter for the next decade or so. A lot of people are saying that, okay, Brock Purdy played really well, so he's the number one guy. We do not know that at this exact moment. And right now he has a lot of value because he's very young. Obviously at the quarterback position in Dynasty, and there's a ton of value there. I would probably try and sell him right now. You get a ton of value. You can figure things out. This is not the kind of guy that was drafted in the first round. Really just get rid of him right now while he has a ton of value. Like I said, he's being talked about as a starting quarterback for the next decade. Excuse me. I just don't know if we could be too sure about that just yet.
Yeah, for me, I mean, Trey Lance, again, he's only 23 years old. They put a ton of draft stock into him, trading up to go get him. I'm just a big believer in Trey Lance and what I think the future is going to be for him. And so for me, I'm not sure that Brock Purdy is going to be the guy. And yeah, I most of the time in your league, if you have Brock Purdy on your roster, you probably got him for free. You probably got him on waivers or something like that. Unless you're in the deepest of Dynasty leagues. And so, kind of this might be the time where, return on investment, you got them for free. And so now you're going to kind of turn it into something. Might be a good idea just from that standpoint. And then, you trade them to one of those teams in Superflex where, they need a second quarterback and, they're just trying to find a starter. And all of a sudden there's Brock Purdy, and it's the name value, I think, that he has right now. So probably a guy I would sell on.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you mentioned just a guy that you pick up off waivers. You didn't pay anything for him, just a waiver claim. And I mean, it was worth it in the end. Go get some value out of it and get something for the future for your Dynasty team.
Yeah, so now let's just jump right over to the next one. We have Jared Goff. Jared Goff, he finished quarterback 10 in 4 weeks, or he finished quarterback 10 for the whole season. In 4 of the weeks, he was in the top 5. So is he really a sell high candidate with a guy looming over there that they just drafted?
I mean, I think he is, just based on he's the starter right now. He's that number one guy. They're going to roll with him. However, you don't know if he's going to be moving as the starting quarterback for Detroit for such a long period of time. I mean, he is 28. So it's a little bit young based on the age of quarterbacks. However, he's coming off his second best season of his career. The value is definitely there. You haven't seen a ton of great Jared Goff moments. Obviously, the Super Bowl year where he took the Rams to the Super Bowl. And then last year where he had a really successful season with the Detroit Lions. I would try and sell him now. There's a ton of value. Like I said, he is the number one guy. He's the starting quarterback in Detroit, a very pass-heavy type offense that Dan Campbell has up in Detroit. Like I said, at the age of 28, I would try and get some value on Jared Goff at this moment.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think that, you have Hendon Hooker there as well, which you never know what might happen in Detroit and what quickly want to turn the page. But for Goff, I'm not sure he can keep up the quarterback one level of play. He was in the top 10, and I think that really has a lot of weight, especially when you try to negotiate a trade and you almost use that as some of the fuel. But yeah, for a dynasty perspective, I think that Goff, this year is going to be interesting because, of course, they did draft a running back really early. They did sign David Montgomery, so they might start to lean a little bit more into the run. And so I'm just a little scared about those numbers and whether or not he can keep up that pace.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I don't know if Jared Goff is right now a top 10 type quarterback like people are valuing him as. I don't know if he could keep it up for a long period of time, like I said, at the age of 28.
Yeah, and you might want to go to, again, some of those quarterback needy teams who sees Jared Goff, sees numbers from last year, and says, let's strike. I need a number one quarterback. That's the kind of team that I think you want to target in this kind of a trade.
Yeah, I completely agree. And let's get into our next quarterback, and that's Daniel Jones for the New York Giants. Brett, a really strong season for Daniel Jones. A lot of expectations heading into the year that maybe he wouldn't be the starting quarterback if he wasn't successful. Was very successful under center with Brian Dable coming in as the head coach. Where do you think he is? I think he's a sell high right now.
Completely. And I think that the mistakes that he made in the first couple of years of his career are what lead to this moment. I'm not sure he can keep to the quarterback one levels that he last year. Listen, he had a great year. He learned how to run with the ball, and that totally changed the outlook on Daniel Jones from a fantasy perspective. A ton of hype right now with Darren Waller trade happening. And so I think that now might be the time to sell on Daniel Jones. Especially, we're very unsure about the Saquon situation and all of that. And so I'm not quite sure that the long-term future of Daniel Jones is good. The value, though, is really high right now. So now might be the time.
Yeah, completely. And he came into the league. I mean, a lot of people talked about him as a passing quarterback and the arm strength that he had coming out of Duke. Now he brings the rushing ability in Brian Dable's offense. So now, I mean, the value's there. Like we said, it was by far his most consistent season in the NFL. I don't know if I could just put him in the top 10 like a lot of people are right now, or just on the edge of top 10. He is a starting quarterback. You would want him, and he would probably be a QB2 on your dynasty team. But get the value right now. Get rid of him. Maybe start planning for the future, especially if you're not in contention this year. A guy like Daniel Jones, teams will want that from Daniel Jones and his rushing ability. So try and get some value while you can right now.
Yeah, and just a reminder, we're not saying that these are bad players. When we sell a player, it's not because they're a bad player. They can be a really good player. We just don't think that they will achieve the value that they're currently at. So think of it like the stock market, where the stock market goes up and you want to sell your shares, but you want to buy them while they're low. That's kind of what we're doing. So Daniel Jones is a great quarterback. I think he's going to have a good year. I think that a guy like Darren Waller might end up being, a favorite target of his. So if you do want to get somebody on the Giants, I think it would be Darren Waller. But at the same time, probably can sell on Daniel Jones just based on, I'm not sure he's going to be able to achieve levels.
Yeah, completely. I don't think he's going to hit that level that he hit last year, and that's what we're talking about. Not going to be able to hit that level really anytime soon or ever for the rest of their career. That's what we're saying here, and might as well make use to the value that he has right now.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition into our next quarterback, and that's Aaron Rodgers, who is a great quarterback and former MVP, former Super Bowl champion. He's 39 years old, though, and he's going to a new team, and we're kind of unsure what's going to happen. You think that Garrett Wilson will get some uptick in value and some of those other wide receivers on the team and Breece Hall and guys like those who will, obviously the game elevates when Rodgers on the field, especially when he's on your team. But he's 39. So in a dynasty value for me, sell.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's really not about the stats at this point in Aaron Rodgers' career. You know what he's kind of going to give you, and there might be a little bit of a drop off from when he was in Green Bay, but I'm selling him right now just based on the hype that he's getting. New York, being in a completely new offense, being in a team that's maybe a Super Bowl contender. All of that hype, you're getting a ton of value for Aaron Rodgers. He has all kinds of weapons in his offense. And if you can still get value for a 39-year-old quarterback, get rid of him. Get rid of him. There's no reason to keep him. I understand if you're a contender and you want to keep him, and that makes sense. But if you're not in contention, get rid of Aaron Rodgers right now. There's never going to be more value than there is to start this year. He might be terrible this year for New York when it comes to fantasy, and then you lose out on the value that he has right now. The hype is insane, and you better make use of that value if you're not a contender.
Yeah, and it's funny because, everywhere outside of New York, it's the big thing. Here in New York, there's a lot of that Brett Favre talk and whether or not he'll be able to do it. But listen, when Brett Favre came here, he was great and right up until his injury. And so, he obviously has some talented receivers there. I think that it will be a good year, but again, if he retires at the end of the year, then his value is zero. And so sell if you can, unless you're a completely, desperate team. There's a team in our league that has some older quarterbacks on their team. You probably want to get younger, and get a good young piece out of Aaron Rodgers. Trade him to one of those contending teams that's going for the ride.
Exactly. One of those teams is going to want him and adding another piece to what they already have to try and win the championship. Aaron Rodgers is a perfect guy to trade right now at the age of 39, like we said.
Yeah, so as we get into running backs now, we're going to go to his former running back out in Green Bay. It's Aaron Jones, and he's also got a lot of hype, and it's because Aaron Rodgers isn't there. But he does have another running back sitting there behind him in A.J. Dillon. So does it make it a sell high for you here?
So, yeah, he definitely is a sell high at this moment in time, just based on, yes, I understand when people have the argument that, yeah, he's the number one guy. They're going to run the ball a lot. Jordan loves the quarterback. However, A.J. Dillon is there, and Aaron Jones, it's very out of nowhere that he's 28 years old. He's already 28. He might be starting to get closer to that decline when it comes to running backs, that cliff where it just does not work out anymore for running backs. At the age of 28, I think this is a good time to sell him. Maybe you wait a little bit, maybe a year to see how things are going. But I think that decline, like I said, is going to start to come soon at the age of 28, especially with A.J. Dillon right behind him, and hoping the Packers can give him his second contract as a running back.
Yeah. So listen, A.J. Dillon, he was a bust for the first half of the year, but towards the second half, I mean, he was unbelievable. He literally split all the carries there, and Jones, I think that they are going to start to lean towards that as they start to get younger. Right now, it seems that Aaron Jones is the older piece. They're kind of investing a lot in the youth, and they just drafted a whole bunch of weapons on offense, some wide receivers, some tight ends, and so I think that this could be towards the end of Aaron Jones's reign here in Green Bay. And so that to me scares me. But at the same time, everyone's saying it's Aaron Jones season. And so therefore, sell.
Yeah, I completely agree. And last year, Aaron Jones had the most rushing yards in his career. So the value is definitely there. I mean, there's a ton of value, and people will want Aaron Jones looking forward to that Green Bay offense this year.
Yes. Actually, that stat was 6 touchdowns in 5 games down the stretch for A.J. Dillon. He split the carries exactly 50-50. So, I think we're going to start to see a trend a little more towards the other way. And so, yeah, I think Aaron Jones, he does have a lot of value. He's still probably worth one of those higher second-round picks. If you can get a late first for him in a rookie draft, then that's awesome. I think that's great value for Aaron Jones, a guy who's on the older side. And those running backs, I mean, they hit the cliff as they start to get into their late 20s. And so he's kind of there now. So, we'll see what happens. But again, I preface it by saying he's not a bad running back, but at the same time, I think fantasy perspective, you're going to have to try to, achieve the value there.
Yeah, it's about that time to start selling on Aaron Jones. And let's move to our next one down in Cleveland, and that's Nick Chubb. Maybe a question mark here. He's still only 27, but that decline, like we're talking about, could come pretty soon, Brett.
Yeah, listen, he was running back 6. They don't have Kareem Hunt anymore. It could be a big year. There was a lot of talk early this offseason about him being a receiver. He played 75% on the top back, and so he ran around on 71 of those on the dropbacks, and then he caught 5 of 6 targets. And so he had 45 yards receiving. A lot of talk of him starting to take that role of being the pass catching back, and I'm just not sure how it's going to happen. And for me, I think that Chubb's going to have a great year. He's going to score a bunch of touchdowns. That said, the value for him is really, really high. So you could probably get a pretty good haul for a guy like Nick Chubb.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the value, like we're talking about, I'm thinking maybe early first round in rookie drafts. This guy has a ton of value just based on the consistency. He has ridiculous numbers each and every year. He was running back 6 last season. But like I said, at 27 now, they're starting to think about it. And you might say, oh, he could have a ridiculous year. Yes. However, the decline is coming soon. So you have to start thinking about it. And if you can plan, especially if you're not a contender right now, if you can plan to get rid of Nick Chubb right now and start to plan for the future, you could get a really high profile young rookie, especially early in a rookie draft.
Yeah. And I mean, listen, if you were going to get like Jahmyr Gibbs for Nick Chubb, I think that's a thing you think about. You might even be able to get more than just Jahmyr Gibbs. And so that to me is where it is in terms of his value. You talk about like Jackson Smith and Jigba. I like to invest a lot in the wide receivers and the quarterbacks just based on the longevity. Whereas it's a more fluid situation. You see a lot of running back by committee now. But for me, I think that Chubb's kind of at that point where you're almost going to recycle to the next one. We talked Derrick Henry a lot last week, and where that cliff just kind of comes, and you're not really sure till the cliff comes. So for me, I think he's approaching that, but sell him because his value is really, really high right now.
Yeah, completely agree with you.
All right, so let's jump to the next one, and another guy whose value is just extremely high is Josh Jacobs. He was the running back 3. He led the NFL in touches through the first 17 weeks. He's a bell cow. He's going to be a bell cow, but at the same time, like there's contract issues going on right now, and he's not exactly afraid to, sound his disapproval on social media and through the media.
Yeah, completely. And he might even hold out. There's been question marks about that. You don't want to have to deal with that. Number one on your team, a guy holding out who could end up being one of your best players. And you might be saying, Josh Jacobs just had the best season of his career. Why would you sell him? There is absolutely, I can assure you, there's absolutely no chance that Josh Jacobs puts up over 2,000 scrimmage yards for the rest of his career. This season was insane. This guy didn't come even close to it the couple of years before, the 3 years before. And this last season was absolutely ridiculous. I don't think he's going to come anywhere close to there for the rest of his career. Like I said, 2,000 scrimmage yards is a ton. That's McCaffrey type numbers. I don't think that's going to happen in this offense. I think they're going to have to move the ball around a little bit more. And for that reason, Josh Jacobs' value will never be higher than it is right now.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, there's all the noise of contract talks and what the team puts out, but there's been a lot of hype this past week about Zamir White and him getting a little bit of an extended role out there. And so, I don't know if there's, news or noise about it, but at the same time, like, it is out there and it is being spoken about Zamir White and how they might start to get him a little more work, even just because Jacobs got a ton of work last year, and there was really nobody behind him.
Exactly, and that starts to worry you a little bit, especially a big workload leads to maybe more injuries. You want to try and avoid that. And those running backs, yes, it's good for one season, but only a couple of guys can really do that every single season, get that huge workload, and be able to stay healthy in the NFL.
Yeah, listen, in a redraft league, Josh Jacobs right now, he's going in the first round in pretty much every draft. And so that's the kind of value for a guy that you didn't even think was going to be near that stratosphere. He's up there now. So, I'm cashing out on him as well. I think the next two guys that we have also kind of have a workload basis. We'll start with the first one, Dameon Pierce. He was running back 2 weeks, 210. He ranked 5th in the NFL in rushing yards with 739 yards. He averaged north of 19 carries and 92 rushing yards per game. And, with Pierce, it's an interesting one because they brought Devin Singletary in. And I think that that's going to start to eat into Pierce's value. I don't know that, Pierce is not going to be a good running back. I think he will, but I do see the value taking a bit of a hit this year just based on Singletary alone.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And you mentioned the stats that Pierce was putting up, running back 2 from weeks 2 to 10. It just a really good start to his rookie season. He was running back 15 overall in the 14 weeks that he ended up playing in. Just a really solid running back and a really good guy down in Houston. However, you mentioned Devin Singletary. I wouldn't worry about Devin Singletary's fantasy value, and we spoke about this before. He is just in that room that he could get a little bit annoying. That disruptive guy, just not going to give Dameon Pierce all those carries. I think he's in that annoying type of range, and the value for Dameon Pierce, a really young running back right now, I think the value is very high, so I'd try and sell.
Yeah, and I mean, with Singletary, I had to go out and acquire James Cook because I was getting annoyed with, who is the number one over there and all of that. Singletary totaled, he had 9 more carries than James Cook in the last 7 weeks. And so, yeah, he is going to be that pest. And so that's where I don't know that Singletary has standalone value, but again, I think it's going to take a hit into Pierce's value. And Pierce's value is high right now. Listen, he was a workhorse last year. And so I think that now is probably the time where you want to kind of cash in on that as again, the league is changing. This league is really going from that workhorse guy that's getting 25, 30 carries for the game, and it's starting to be 2 guys. And so these 2-headed monsters, like we talk about out in Seattle, we talked a few weeks ago about it with Charbonnet and with W3. Like, it's an interesting case of what's going to happen, what the future of this league is going to entail, and the investment in the running backs and how fluid it's going to be. Just, so that's where I think we kind of lie with the running back value.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned the couple of running backs, maybe a 2-headed monster. Most teams do that. Some teams even have 3. I mean, we're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. That team has 3 guys that they can rely on each and every week, and that really hurts some fantasy value.
Right. Now we head into another guy who his backups are receiving a lot of hype right now. There was some contract talks. There was some trade talks. It was Austin Eckler. And so, he had 5 top 3 finishes. He was running back 2. He's the top of pretty much every draft not named Mr. McCaffrey. He's the second guy off the board in pretty much every redraft league. So is now the time to sell him?
Yeah, it is. It's crazy to say that a guy that's so high up in drafts and is going to be maybe the 2nd, 3rd overall pick in redraft leagues this year. It's about that time that you try and sell him in Dynasty. Obviously, 20 and 18 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. You're getting a ton of numbers. It's very difficult for him to keep replicating that, though. He's already 28 years old. I mean, we remember this guy. It seems like he just came into the league out of nowhere and was consistent. However, he was behind Melvin Gordon for a while, if you remember, and that took a little bit of the stretch of his career. So he's already 28. Yes, he was running back one, but this guy's a free agent at the end of the season. You got to sell him now. I mean, there might be a team there might not be a team, excuse me, that grabs him next year. We don't know, because we talk about that decline for running backs. Austin Eckler, it's crazy to say, sell him now in Dynasty.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we talked like Dalvin Cook a couple weeks ago, and just think about where his value was. He was one of the top guys off the board, top 5 pick in redraft, and all of a sudden it's like, well, what team are you playing for? And that's the question mark. And so for me, for Austin Eckler's case, I think that it depends kind of on your situation. If you're a team where you're kind of rebuilding right now, you don't really have a lot of pieces, and you do have a guy like Austin Eckler as your main piece, then you might want to sell him just based, again, on the fluidity of the running back position. If you're a contender, I'm probably going to try to hold him for right now and maybe wait in the middle of the season where you get even more for him to one of those teams that is also a contender. If your team does not obviously achieve that, but if you're a contender, you want to acquire a guy like Austin Eckler. So, I can understand if you don't want to trade him. However, you probably can get a lot of young pieces. This is like a multiple picks and players trade because, again, he is at the very top of the board.
Yeah, completely. And definitely like feel comfortable. If you feel like you're a contender right now, you can wait till middle of the year, see how things are going. If you're struggling, I mean, that's the perfect time to get rid of a guy like Austin Eckler, because there are teams that are going to want him to help their team and boost their chances for a championship. Austin Eckler, definitely a guy right now to sell high on.
Yeah, so now we start to get into the wide receivers, and it's those backups that I feel like, the league is just getting younger. And so with Tyler Lockett, we start with him, and they just drafted JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba. And it seems like Lockett could potentially be the odd man out. It's kind of wishy-washy of the report out whether he'll still have that kind of a role. And, we're seeing it on both sides.
Yeah. And I mean, this guy, when we came up with doing Dynasty sell highs for this week, there was only one guy on my mind when we went to wide receivers, and that's Tyler Lockett. Just based on it's so crowded now. They added JSN. They have DK Metcalf, who's very young. Tyler Lockett, it's crazy to say, he's 30 years old. I mean, he's old at this point. And that older age range of wide receivers, try and get rid of him right now. He was wide receiver 13 last year, a ton of value. People are still going to be believing in him. They don't think there's going to be a huge drop off with JSN coming in, just based on JSN and Lockett play maybe similar roles. So they think Tyler Lockett could still be good for a while. I'm not one of those people. I mean, I think the value is at its peak right now in his career. Like we said, wide receiver 13 last year. You got to sell Tyler Lockett as soon as possible.
Yeah, we spoke about, and a couple of weeks ago when we previewed the NFC West, and for Lockett, it's interesting because, again, I said that I saw him as a high wide receiver 3, a low end wide receiver 2 was his peak, and just based on the deep balls, we rewind to 2 years ago, half of his fantasy points came on 50-yard bombs. And so it's an interesting case of, do you sell him and then what's the value? I think this is a case where, yeah, he's 30. And so, again, try to trade him for one of those younger receivers. If you're going to try to trade for a receiver, trade for a younger one. You probably could even get the multiple mid-level guys just to kind of build out your team. Because he was a top 15 receiver last year. And so I think that speaks volume. I'm not sure that he'll be able to achieve that this year.
Yeah, completely. He's a wide receiver 2 in my mind. Heading into this year, even with JSN, I value him a little bit higher. But that's just based on the impact he had with Geno Smith last year. There's a lot of people still believing in Tyler Lockett, like I said. And it is time to start to get maybe that mid-level or a couple mid-level wide receivers like you mentioned.
Yeah, so now we head over to Cleveland, where we have Amari Cooper. He came in, he was great. 12th in red zone targets and deep targets, 16th in target share in the league, but he's 29 years old. And we talk about that cliff a little bit again here. But the quarterback wasn't as good as they really thought he would be.
Yeah, definitely. And Deshaun Watson's going to be there for their foreseeable future right now as things stand. This is another guy that, oh my God, he had an unbelievable year. Why would you get rid of him? I don't know if the value is going to be as high as it is. He is in a very questionable offense. I mean, Cleveland, we don't know who's going to be the number one guy. Things can switch around very quickly. Obviously, Nick Chubb is going to get a bigger workload, we think. So that could take away a little bit from Amari Cooper. He was wide receiver 10 last year. I don't know if his value is going to be any higher than it is right now at the age of 29. It's a perfect time really to sell on Amari Cooper. And yes, he still has a bunch of good years left, you would have to say. I don't know if it's top 10.
Yeah, and listen, they traded for Elijah Moore, and so I think that's another guy that not a lot of people are really talking about, and we've seen the impact that he had in New York. And Elijah's really good in space. I think that it's going to become one of those targets for Deshaun Watson that he's going to continue to go to, especially as he starts to throw on the run and that kind of thing. I think that Elijah Moore is one of those receivers that's really not being spoken about. The other thing, and this is interesting because we don't really talk contract situation of the really good players, but the saving the money, the recycling. Amari Cooper could be cut at the end of this year and they would save $20 million off of the cap. And they just invested a ton into the quarterback. And so, with the cap and the way that it goes, like there's always the potential that Amari Cooper gets cut as a post June 1st cut at the end of this season.
Yeah, and he could be a trade target maybe as well. There's so many question marks right now, and like I said, I don't think he's going to end up finishing in the top 10 for a while, if not ever, for the rest of his career. And the value is high right now, and you're going to try and see if you could get something for Amari Cooper.
All right, let's jump to the next one, and it's another guy who's very much at the very top of the wide receiver rankings. It's Tyreek Hill. And Tyreek, he was pretty vocal about that he's going to retire at the end of this contract. You only have a couple of years left of him. But his quarterback also is a weird situation where Tua talked about he almost retired this offseason with the concussion issues and his long-term health. We're not quite sure. Tyreek, listen, he's a beast. He's going to be a beast. But at the same time, like, is he going to finish as the wide receiver one this year?
I mean, he's going to be up there, definitely. He's in that offense, and they're going to get him the ball. This was hard to put him on this list just based on he is so dominant when it comes to fantasy football, a guy that you definitely want on your team. I'm not saying as a contender, get rid of him, but if you're rebuilding right now, you should get rid of Tyreek Hill. You're going to get a ton of value. We had the trade come in last week where one of our viewers traded for Tyreek Hill. I mean, he gave up a really good package for Tyreek Hill, a first and 2 seconds. I mean, that's a great deal right there for a guy like Tyreek Hill that still has some question marks of if he's going to retire at the end of his contract. He's 29 years old. I don't think there's a better time to trade Tyreek Hill. Like I said, for rebuilding teams, if you're contending right now, don't give up Tyreek Hill just yet. Just wait a little bit longer on him. Save him right now. He's gonna be a beast for you.
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of situation we were just talking about with Austin Eckler, where if you're one of those contending teams and you see yourself as a contender, wait into the middle of the season, see how your team does before you start selling off a guy like Tyreek Hill. At the same time, I can understand if you feel like you're rebuilding and you're a younger roster, you have a lot of younger pieces, and then you have Tyreek Hill. You need to kind of fill out that roster a little more. Like you could get a haul from him. You could get a ton of picks for him, especially those leagues that don't limit the amount of picks that you have. Like you could get a haul for Tyreek Hill. So yeah, that would be my suggestion is if you're rebuilding, like just see what's out there. See what the market is for Tyreek, but somebody would be willing to even pay you for Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, and Brett, that leads into our next guy. I think it's very similar situations between these two guys. That guy is Stefan Diggs up in Buffalo. I think it's going to be the same type of situation. This one, Stefan Diggs, he's going to be 30 in December. Still some question marks. There's been question marks so far this offseason of is he comfortable in Buffalo? Yes, he showed up to OTAs, but that there was one day where he didn't, and he was pissed off, and things are going on. They're trying to work some things out. Get yourself out of that situation. Ton of value right now. He was wide receiver 4. I mean, a great time to get rid of Stefan Diggs, like we said, if you're rebuilding at this moment in time.
Yeah, and it also might be a guy that you might want to buy high on,
Yeah.
just based on the fact that, listen, he's top 5 in red zone targets. He was top 10 in target share. Like you said, he was wide receiver 4. There's that first wave of receivers, and I'm not sure that he's in that anymore. I think he's at the very top of the second wave of receivers that come off the board. And so you can, because the cliff's going to come. Um, the whole situation in Buffalo is interesting right now, just based on he wants more of a piece of offense. And it comes to like, wait a minute, weren't they throwing to you almost every single time? And so you're not really sure how much more they can throw to him. And so it's interesting just of how it's going to go. The crowd's really split right now on him. There are people who love Stephon Diggs, and therefore you can get a ton of value for him. And then there's the crowd that really doesn't like him. And that's where I'm saying you might be able to, it's almost like you can buy low, but it's, the value is obviously still going to be where it is for Stephon Diggs. So it's almost like a buy high because you're probably going to get a little bit of discount on him. And so I think it kind of just depends on what your league is like.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, and it's a tough situation to judge right now in Buffalo. We don't have a ton of answers, so you can't really tell at this moment in time. But like we said, the age is getting up there. He's going to be 30 in December. You got to start to think about Stefan Diggs.
Yeah. So now we head to another guy, and I mean, we talk about the potentials of getting cut and the contracts and all of that, and we hit Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen had to restructure his contract. They just drafted another receiver in the first round. There's talk of him or Mike Williams potentially not being on the team next year, or potentially both of them not being on the team next year. He was great. He was hurt for 7 of the first 9 games, but he was great. He was wide receiver 4 in points per game. But he still has a high floor. I think he's going to get a lot of targets this year. But, from a dynasty perspective, it might not be a so wonderful future for Keenan Allen out there.
Yeah, for redraft leagues, I love Keenan Allen this year. I think he's going to have a unbelievable year. In Dynasty, I think it's going to be his last good season. I think he's going to have a terrific year, but then it's going to start to wind down. And the contract situation, still figuring things out. He was wide receiver 3 in the last 7 weeks of the season. All this depends on health of Keenan Allen. He's a great target, like I said, in redraft, but he just turned 31 and the career starting to come to an end. Even as a contender, I would look to move Keenan Allen just because the age is up there, and there's not going to be much more from Keenan Allen. If you could get a young piece or a young wide receiver or even a draft pick, it's a good deal right now for Keenan Allen just because the value is going to start to plummet at the end of this year, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, I just said before, like he missed 7 of the first 9 games. There might be a point this season where the injuries start to linger and he's out a couple weeks or he's missing practices and the value kind of dips. So to me, I would say that this is more of a guy that you would want to trade in the offseason than during the season. Of course, that's a risk. There's the risk that he does become a really good receiver and then the value is even more in the season than what it is now. But at the same time, like, that's kind of the risk of dynasty in any way. I would say probably trade him in the offseason just based on the last couple of years. He's been banged up a lot. And so for me, I would say before you even see what QJ brings to the table, get rid of Keenan Allen.
Exactly. And the age is always the question. I mean, you'd rather get rid of him right now there's going to be a ton of question marks next offseason. You don't want to have to deal with that and deal with those question marks. People are not going to maybe want Keenan Allen once those question marks start to pop up.
Yeah, so now we head into a guy who I think his value dipped from what it was the season before it. And so while his sell high, I think it's more on name value, and that's Deebo Samuel. The usage, he certainly wasn't what it was. They didn't use him as a runner. Then they got Christian McCaffrey, and so he became the runner. So take us a little bit through Deebo.
So exactly what you just said. The name value is the reason why Deebo Samuel is on this list. I don't know if I would put him as a sell high quote, just based on he didn't have a great season last year. There wasn't a ton of value, but the name is huge. A lot of people know who he is. They know he's turning 28. I mean, there's still questions at QB. They want Deebo Samuel right now. Me, on the other hand, I would try and get rid of him right now just based on the questions, like I mentioned, at quarterback. McCaffrey's in the backfield. He's going to get a ton of work. He's Christian McCaffrey. As long as he's on the field, I mean, that guy's going to get a ton of targets and a ton of touches in that offense. The name value of Deebo Samuel right now, nonetheless, you got to get rid of him right now.
Yeah, the stats didn't really speak for themselves. He was wide receiver 28. He had 25.4% target share, which was 19th in the league, but he only had 5 deep targets the entire year. That put him 108th in the league. 12 red zone looks, which put him 36th in the league. To me, it's a flex guy that, is not going to have the rush upside. And I think that people are kind of overlooking that because they're saying, oh, but he did it already, so they're going to do some trick plays and, end arounds and things like that. No, I think that this is going to lean into Christian McCaffrey more as they get more comfortable with CMC. And so, yeah, sell on the name value. Again, he's going to be 28. He's just said it.
Yeah, and we talked about the rushing. I mean, most of that came, I feel like, before McCaffrey was really involved in the offense or before McCaffrey was there. So there's really no point of that. McCaffrey's going to take those touches. He's the number one guy. They still have Elijah Mitchell as well. Those guys are going to get the touches at the running back position.
Yeah, I think his highest week, actually, that Deebo had in rushing when CMC was on the roster was just the week 1 where they gave CMC his one package they had him running in. And so, I think that that'll start to go by the wayside and they're going to start to use Deebo more as a receiver, which I'm not sure how much value that is.
Yeah, completely. And another big name that we have listed here is a really big name. He had a great season last year, but it's starting to come towards that time, and that's Davante Adams getting a new quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo. Is it the right time to sell Davante Adams?
Yeah, well, listen, he's 30 years old. He's going to a new quarterback. The quarterback's health is actually a concern. We talk a lot about how people are knocking Jimmy G's accuracy. He's a really good quarterback. He's a very accurate quarterback, as we just alluded to before with him and Brandon Ayuk and things like that. But at the same time, to me, Davante, he's 30 years old. You can't throw to him every single time. It's just going to lead to some sort of injury. And as you start to hit that age and the next couple of years, I think we're going to see that cliff. I'm not sure it's going to go straight down, but I think it'll be a nice little plateau for Davante just based on his ability. I don't know that it could be a cliff. But, we saw guys like Julio Jones who were getting the same kind of target share and started to deal with leg injury and then foot injury. And then, it kind of just started to linger. I think that that's unfortunately what Davante might start going through, especially just because he doesn't really have the supporting cast. And yeah, he has the running back, but I'm not sure that the supporting cast at receiver is really going to help his case. And then, we're not really sure on the future of Jimmy G and what his health looks like and the medicals and all of that. So to me, listen, in a redraft league, he's a second round pick like he was. But I think that this is the time where you want to get that value for Davante after, you probably have had him for a while for those long-standing dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the biggest worry, in my opinion, you said it's the quarterback. The difference right now between Jimmy G And what Davante Adams had in the past with Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, they were able to throw deep balls consistently to him. I mean, the deep threat for Jimmy G, yeah, it's there a tiny bit, but it's not a lot. I mean, it's not the same. You're not going to get those deep targets as much from guys like different from guys like Derek Carr and Aaron Rodgers, who put it on the button every single time Davante Adams went downfield. That's the question mark for me. And yes, you may say, okay, well, he'll get shorter targets. You're not going to get a ton of fantasy points from that, though. It's going to take some time to work, and obviously the injury concerns for Jimmy Garoppolo. I think it's a good time right now to sell on Davante Adams. If you're contending, I can understand like keeping him and seeing how things go. But I mean, he might struggle. We don't know. That's the question right now with the quarterback position. He might struggle in the first 8 weeks or so, and then you might not be able to sell him for the value that he has right now.
Yeah, I think that's a perfectly good segue into our next guy who doesn't have Aaron Rodgers anymore. It's Christian Watson. Listen, he's really, really young. The value was great. The breakout was awesome last year. He's going Jordan Love, and Jordan Love's pretty unproven. He did show, a couple games last year where, he could be a good quarterback, but I'm not sure he's going to be Aaron Rodgers level. He has to develop himself into that. And obviously, Christian Watson and working together with him, they could all of a sudden figure out that camaraderie and grow together. But I'm not sure that it's going to happen right away. And so that's why I think that Christian Watson right now, his value might be plateaued for a while before it starts to go up again. And so I think it's high right now. I think it's pretty high just based on the breakout. A lot of people like to go out and get young players, thinking that they're getting younger, but at the same time, they're not getting better. I think that might be the case for a guy like Christian Watson's fantasy value.
Yeah, completely. And the age and the production, I mean, was great last year. He's so young, still has a lot of time in the NFL, but he was wide receiver 9 from weeks 10 to week 18. That's great numbers. But we talked about it. It's from Aaron Rodgers and him at quarterback. There's still a ton of questions about Jordan Love and can he fit into that Green Bay offense? Can he do even close to what Aaron Rodgers was able to do while in Green Bay? A lot of owners look at the age and production, like I mentioned, and they could offer a hefty amount for a guy like Christian Watson right now because he's the number one guy in Green Bay. He's the number one wide receiver. And like I said, the age, he's super young and still has a lot of time to look forward to in the NFL.
Yeah, again, it's those teams that are trying to get younger and they think they're getting a good young piece that was a top 10 potential receiver. And so that's kind of where you hit the value where you might be able to get one of those upper echelon wide receivers that's out of the rookie draft and that might be in a better spot. I think that's kind of where you look at Christian Watson and whether you even package him with somebody to get a higher piece. One of those more established players. I think that's where I would go with the Christian Watson trade.
Yeah, completely. I was going to say, I think he can also fit into that package him with maybe another guy and you get a 25, 26-year-old, and that can really help you advance your team for maybe into contention.
And so now I feel like we're doing some pretty good segues here. Another guy who could probably do that, or might even get a package together for, is Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is 33 years old, and that's insane to me that he's 33 years old because he plays like he's 25. I don't know that he really has many signs that he's going to slow down just because he's getting catches from Patrick Mahomes and he's the favorite target of Patrick Mahomes. But at the same time, I'm not sure the value in fantasy is going to be as high as it is right now.
I completely agree. This guy could be in redraft leagues like the 6th pick in a 12-team league. Like, just draft him early, and these people love their tight ends because he's basically a wide receiver. He does the same exact things, and he gets really almost the same amount of yards and maybe even more touchdowns than wide receivers do. He's a beast right now, but my one problem is the age. he's going to be 34 in October. You got to start to think about it as a dynasty owner. And you might say that's crazy because the value is going to be ridiculous this year. It might be crazy next year. And this guy's going in the first round right now, mid first round of redraft leagues. This value, I don't know if it could get any higher than it is right now. He's not gonna start edging out running backs and wide receivers at the top of the draft. I mean, yes, it's understandable that maybe he could be even better. He's not getting any better. He's at the peak right now. He might plateau and stay the same, but he's not getting any higher than he is right now.
Yeah, I think that this is one of those cases where you can get a haul and still get a tight end, like a really good tight end with it. You know, somebody trying to upgrade from a Mark Andrews or even a Darren Waller. Just talk about Darren Waller. Like, you could get Darren Waller and then a lot more and still have a good tight end while trading away Travis Kelce. So I think that for me, listen, I understand the whole tight end has, you know, the value up here for the top couple guys, and then it kind of goes down to here for the next group. But at the same time, like, you could still get one of those top tier guys and trade away Travis Kelce. That's where I would to where you're not totally downgrading to one of those like 20th ranked tight ends, but you could still get a top 5 tight end. Well, they're 2, 3, 4, or 5, but they're not Travis Kelce. You could still get that while at the same time making out, you know, with a pick or one piece.
Yeah, completely. And it could be one of those guys in the rookie draft. I mean, talking about guys, Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta, just a couple of guys. And then you also look at guys who are in the middle of their careers. TJ Hawkinson. I mean, you can get a guy like TJ Hawkinson easily for Travis Kelce at this moment in time. People would love to have Kelce on their roster because they think it'll advance them. You got to start to think about the decline. I mean, guys right in the middle, like you said, those young type of players, TJ Hawkinson, Pat Fryermuth is another guy. They get a lot of targets and they could give you similar value to what a normal tight end does. And then you can upgrade as well with more in the package for Travis Kelce.
Yeah, and I think it's just interesting because we said it, like, he's 33, and so, you know, when's he gonna retire? And it's weird to talk about that at age 33, but at the same time, you know, when you compare it to like quarterbacks per se, but at the same time, look at some of these mid 30 guys, and they're gonna check out just there. They've made their money. Kelce got a big contract, and so that's so I think that's kind of where it's going to go right now. And luckily, Kelce has not dealt with injuries like a guy like Rob Gronkowski did, where he had to, you know, take a hit at number, I think it was 29 when he started talking about retirement. And so, you know, he hasn't had that, which is good. But at the same time, like, he might just one day say, I think I'm done. And then all of a sudden the value poof. So they're cash in now.
Yeah, I was going to say it's similar. It's a little bit different from a guy like Rob Gronkowski who dealt with a couple of injuries. But Travis Kelce, I mean, the Chiefs are there's not a lot of teams stopping them right now. So if he starts racking up rings, he could be like, all right, well, I got enough. It's time to move on. I mean, he's in that situation. I got my money. I got my championships. Okay, let's start to move on to something else. And then you're stuck in a situation. So avoid that and get rid of Travis Kelce.
All right. I think we've spoken enough about our top tight end. Now we're going to head kind of down the list here, but not too far, because I think this guy could be a top 10 tight end. But there's another guy coming in as a pass catcher, and it might hurt his value, Evan Ingram. There's a lot of talk about, could Calvin Ridley come in and take away those targets this year? And, you know, some of the other receivers might be taking away targets. Listen, he finished really good. He had 73 catches, 766 yards, 4 touchdowns, but I'm unsure about that target number. So Evan Ingram might be a guy that I would sell.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Just my worry is the offense is going to get a little more crowded with Calvin Ridley coming in. They have 3 wide receivers. They got a really good running back. They might have another running back behind ETN, and then they have Evan Ingram. I mean, you can only get so much. He was tight end 5 last year, career highs all over the list last season. I don't know if the value is going to be any higher than it is right now. Like I said, tight end 5. So it's a good situation. Yes, he has Trevor Lawrence as his quarterback, and yes, it could be good for the next couple of years. However, I don't know if he's getting the same amount of targets he was able to get last season with now Calvin Ridley in the offense. Plus Christian Kirk, you would have to say it might be a boost for Christian Kirk, and he might get even more targets just based on the chemistry he built last season with Trevor Lawrence.
So it's interesting. Listen, he's in his late 20s, Evan Ingram. So it's not like he's, at the end of his career, but at the same time, like you, I don't know that he's going to be a top 5 tight end. He could be a top 10, but at the same time, this might be one of those cases where you trade for a rookie pick, something like that. Again, we talked about like Michael Mayer might be a guy that you look at, one of those guys with a longer term future. In that early second round, I think is probably where you can get a pick for Evan Ingram. Yeah,
completely. And just replace them and keep keep it rolling. I would say just the age. Keeping it moving with maybe a young guy replacing Evan Ingram in your lineup.
All right. I think we've hit all of our targets here. Any questions that anybody has, make sure you tweet at Brett Malamud. Zach, what's your handle?
At Zach Malamud.
At Zach Malamud. Pretty easy to remember. But until next week, we're going to talk about some sleepers in your redraft league as we start to head into draft season. So stay tuned for that one. And we'll see you guys next week here on the Third Round Reversal Fantasy Football Podcast. Brett Malamud signing off with Zach Malamud. We'll see you guys next week.